This talk is about my own experience as a developer and this path that I have followed that perhaps many of you are going to follow or will follow or are following. This talk is called Should I Build or Should I Not? And this is my disclaimer. And this talk, I presented it in an international conference. And this is why it is in English, the title. I am Mexican and I am giving this talk in Spanish, but the slides are in English. So, a little bit about me. I have a few years of experience in the industry, always doing web development. I started since I was in college doing web development. And now, in the past 4 or 5 years, I've been in the part of DevOps, which is this new way, or perhaps not so new, to create software. And precisely this title of this talk is inspired in a band that perhaps some of you may know. It's called The Clash. It's a British punk band, and it's from quite a few years ago. It's from my generation, but in particular, they have a song which is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? And it says in a part that if I stay, there will be trouble, and if I go, it will be double. And well, it is what it means. So I am going to be inspired in this song because we as JavaScript developers, well, if we don't do it, well, there's going to be trouble. But if we do not do it, there are going to be more trouble. So that was my motivation. And I ask you to look at this from a holistic point of view so that we have this approach and then we can see each of the components. But that is the premise of this talk. And this book has been written for many years ago, since it was written by John Alspo and Jesse Robbins. And they had this insight of what was going on in web development. And we're talking about this that was called web operations, which said, well, I as a developer, if I am building my site in React, Angular, Vue, or whatever you want, or on the back end, at what point am I going to follow up with the operations in the company? And perhaps you know that there has always been this antagonism, and some authors describe it as the confusion, the wall of confusion. And you as a web developer or as a mobile application developers, when you develop JavaScript, what you want to do is to push your changes and you want to see your changes reflected. So the only constant thing is change. And the sysadmins, the administrators, the DBAs, the team that is on the other side is suffering the consequences of that. Because for them, the normal is to not have any changes, that everything is quiet. That is the good state, the normal state of systems. So this is why we have this wall between developers and operators. So that is the background, that is the problem. So even if I have to say it, well, all software is like this, not only in web development. So web operations are very wide. There are a lot of steps to follow. And we think that many times we only have to send our code, we just commit, and that was that. But when the software gets to production is when it becomes alive. So the infinite cycle that happens in all the presentations of DevOps, that there is the infinite symbol that they show. So one of the conclusions that we reach that the author of this book reaches is that the part of web operations is inevitable, but at that time we just wondered, what is web operations? That now we know as DevOps. So as such, DevOps, WebOps is actually the same, understanding that WebOps is for web-based applications. We see that there are a lot of definitions of DevOps, and there is not one definition that is set in stone. That is something that you reach as an agreement that is accepted. And some definitions are simplistic, that it is the conclusion of the development of operations, as if you are going to sit a developer, an operator, and a sysadmin, and you already have DevOps. No, I mean, it's not as simple as that. It's a lot more complex. And this definition, I think, is very relevant. It is a culture where people, regardless of title or background, work together to imagine, develop, deploy, and operate a system. I like this definition a lot. And the important part is the cultural part, this set of practices that now we haven't seen that DevOps is a competitive advantage that is revolutionizing, it's changing the way of how we develop software and how we are going to create it. And this image is very interesting, is a couple years old, but it doesn't stop being interesting. This is a study made by a company which establishes some competencies and divides them by competencies, the tools that we use to make software. And if nowadays there is an explosion of development in WebOps that involve all the life cycle of software development, configuration, testing, continuous deployment, this structure, security, monitoring, you can see that how they are grouped in a very interesting way. But this is the way we are doing software right now. And this image is referencing, I don't know if many of you have probably said this before, or you have a friend or a partner who said this. Well, it works on my machine. And well, yeah, that was very common. And many times I remember something that happened. It's just that we are not going to take your machine to production as a server. And that happened a lot with node dependencies and library dependencies and all the modules. Well, they are different in the server, and things may or may not work. And this sentence, what it says is that, simply put, things always had to be in production ready state. If you wrote it, you darn well had to be there to get it running. So containers are here for that. You probably have heard about containers now, Docker and Kubernetes everywhere. So this image is funny because now I used to run it in my machine, and now I run it in my container. And this happens because with new architectures, in Apple in M1, well, containers also are tricky, and have trouble. And in this case, well, Docker. And we're talking about generic containers, but Docker is pretty much the lead tool. So we use it almost interchangeably, but they are all containers. So I come from the JavaScript side and developing JavaScript. So I said, all right, do you remember this sentence? It has been said in many talks, and that is, any app that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. It even looks like a curse. But what it refers to is that within the JavaScript ecosystem, logically, or you could think that we also have tools made in JavaScript to continue with this JavaScript flow. And the point was that, of course, we have a lot of DevOps tools. And there are these particular tools, Strider CD, which is completely made in JavaScript. And the proposal was that if you already know JavaScript, if you've been using JavaScript for years, it is a tool that you're going to be comfortable with. Of course, there are a lot of tools. Many of the proposals of continuous integration and continuous delivery are language agnostic. But this is something that we really like. We like JavaScript and using these tools. And this is to be transparent. This is another tool that I'm going to show you. And the motivation to use Strider is that you are in your comfort zone. So you reduce the technological stack, which is something that we're going to have to deal with in our company because we already have Jenkins. And as you know, it's created in Java. So the pipelines, you have to use something else, a DCL, domain-specific language, but from Java. So we have to learn that. And whether it's easy or not, we have to learn it. And here, this tool, if you are already a developer front back, you don't have to invest time in a learning curve. So it is precisely this application that I'm going to show you now, which is running right now. I'm going to open my dashboard. In this case, I am going to run it in Docker. That is the application. We have two choices, installing on-prem or on server. I can install it in my machine or I can install it in a container because containers are the new way of running and sharing the software and scale it. And that's the natural next step because containers change the way of delivering and deploying, and it is a very noticeable change. This is not Strider. This is a web application that I'm running. I'm running it in my Docker. And from here, I can run all my DevOps cycle. I already have a project here. And Strider uses MongoDB. They get along really well. And this is the interface, the Docker interface. I don't know if some of you have worked with other tools. Well, you will see that this tool is very user-friendly, such as web applications that are very usable, very intuitive. So I have here the ecosystem of plugins. This plugin ecosystem is installed in 2 clicks or with npm install. The plugin that I want to install, I just add it to my pipeline. And you can say, well, something that it's also been in development is that you can detonate or trigger pipelines from project in Python, Ruby, or other technologies. But the project as such is created in JavaScript. So I can add something as easy like dragging and dropping the plugins to what I need. So in this case, I already have a first plugin, which is the Node plugin, which I am going to compile and run my server. And I'm going to run tests. And then I have this to deploy to Amazon, to AWS, or the cloud that you choose via SSH. Or I can check in the plugin page those that are available to me, and you can see how easy it is to install. There is an ecosystem. You know that the Java ecosystem, the JavaScript ecosystem is growing. You can even build project in .NET, and that is easy. You can do it with the command line. So I have all in my, everything is available to me. And we can configure each of these. I am running Strider in Docker. It's in a container. And to run my tests, I can even do a Docker in Docker. So I run a Docker within another Docker to have it in a container. But what I'm going to take to production or to other environments, first to before production to Q&A. But running it by default, well, thinking that it's perhaps not Dockerized yet, or I can run it in another Docker. So it's very versatile. We have many tools to run it. And I am going to configure it. The modules are being shown here. And it's as simple as doing this. So if I want to know if my pipelines are getting through the tests, or if I am stuck in a stage of my workflow, I would like to know that. So I already have a plugin to communicate via Slack, and it's as easy as running it. And you can see here that it already sent the Slack message. So you create a Slack just for a group or a channel, and not just saturating the Slack to see if the pipeline failed. And at the end of the day, people are going to hate you. So here I already had set up my pipeline for notifications in a way that I am working, and I will be worried if I see this here. I can see that the tests are going through. And this is one of the many options. We can send emails. We can send Telegram plugins. And this is the pipeline that you can run. There is one that you can set up. You know, Heroku also has a node ecosystem integrated, which is very integrated. So you can just set it up to connect with the output if that is the case. And it's as simple as that. There are a lot more tools, of course, but this is just one. And just to deploy, to run this, so I just click here in deploy, and it's going to start running tests. But I didn't tell it to connect to a cloud server, so it's going to just build the project and test it. And as you can see here, you have like the lights of what is running and when it ran. And it would turn green if any passes the test. And in that way, well, I think I didn't mention that this is, of course, connected to a repository. I know I already had here a repository. It's connected to my GitHub. You can see that this is the provider. It already ran, and it sent me this Slack message, and it's connected to a repository, and it can be connected to GitLab, to GitHub, to any repository, so that you can start thinking about this flow that we have in development. So I, as a developer, want to continue my flow until I reach production. Perhaps not until production, but perhaps one step earlier to make a revision and to get to the release manager who checks that everything is in order. And then he would say, well, let's go to production. And I'm going back to my presentation. So that's the magic. I'm going to show a very easy way to implement JavaScript in DevOps. And the cherry on the cake, this is it. Because we in the pipelines, we have to provision infrastructure, and we have to do that in shell, to write in shell scripts. And well, you say, well, that is very on the side of Linux. And there is another tool that is CY, which is still in an experimental stage, but you will be able to have all the power of shell scripting, but using JavaScript. So that sounds great. There are many options. This tool is being developed by Google, but you will have the power of the servers. So it is not going to substitute it, but there it is. And we talked about Jenkins as an alternative, and we only mentioned it because Jenkins is language agnostic. So you can use it in Angular, React, any JavaScript project. And it has an interface, a visual interface, so that you can build your pipelines, test your code, make the infrastructure provisioning, and go to production. So how many new things do I have to learn? I see you thinking about that, because you know that there's no serious talk without an angry cat. Well, you know, we are here in development and technology, and it never ends. You never stop learning. I know that we have to learn new things, but we have to use these new tools to deal with this complexity. And these are tools that help us to be more complex or be more productive. And as you saw, we have a lot of tools that, of course, are not meant to say that you as a JavaScript developer are going to manage servers or that you need to learn about everything. That is not the case. It's just that with your code that you already know and you're already good at, you can continue this part of operations. So this is teamwork, and we already have a lot of things like this that we can provision infrastructure with JavaScript, which a couple of years ago we couldn't do it. We couldn't lift a server with JavaScript commands. So that is the conclusion that I would like to reach. And that is this, that all developers, JavaScript developers, are cloud developers. I mean, you can get there in the language that you like, and that is it. We can see that there is an evolution of operations that sounds like a joke, like in this presentation. We started with operations, then DevOps, and then DevSecOps that wants to have everything secure. And now we have machine learning components and artificial intelligence. And then we are going to arrive to the Triceratops, which is a joke, of course, but there is a tendency within DevOps, which is called no ops, which is just not having operations, which is reaching a level of automation where we do not have operations. And that on the short term may be possible, may not be possible, but we're going there. So I am going to give you an advice. There is always something to learn. And This is advice from a book that is called Team Typologies, and the point is to limit the cognitive load, because you cannot saturate your team, because tomorrow you're going to have to learn shell, and then testing, and then YAML. So you have to limit that cognitive load. And the idea of using DevOps is precisely to using the tools that we already have within our reach, based in many things. So some companies agree. These are studies made by a particular company that say that the future of DevOps, or the DevOps lead that understand the flow that is oiling the machine. I'm not saying that you don't have to specialize or to learn about everything, but there has to be someone within your organization that understands the flow, and of course that looks to the business.